year, but the same deadly crisis playing out on the streets of Washington state. This segment is brought to you in partnership with our friends over at Future 42. Turn your frustration into action at future42.org. Our friend Jonathan Cho, independent journalist, spent the first few minutes of the new year in downtown Seattle. And what he saw and what he documented was horrifying.
My first post of the new year. Nothing's changed. Just want to say Happy New Year, guys, from 3rd and Pike.
So he's walking down these sidewalks that at various points in 2023 seem to be getting maybe a little bit better. The open air drug markets, the markets full of stolen merchandise. But then here he is. He posted this video at 12:30 a.m. Again, right after a New Year's Eve celebration. And you see people just in the throes of addiction, killing themselves with fentanyl. And this is so heartbreaking given, this issue has been getting progressively worse throughout 2023. And to enter a new year and to see that no gains have been made, it's heartbreaking. And I don't understand how we've allowed it to continue to that extent. Especially, given in King County, we saw record overdoses in 2023. I know that won't surprise anyone, but the numbers are insane. This is from the Seattle Times. King County's 2023 fentanyl deaths top 1,050, surpassing record. It says over 1,050 of the county's nearly 1,300 fatal overdoses this year involved fentanyl, sounding yet another alarm about the potency of the deadly synthetic opioid that's increasingly arriving in King County in powder and rock form, smuggled over the U.S. border from clandestine drug labs in Mexico. At least they acknowledge that. That's good that you're talking about the border issue. They go on to write, and those are just the deaths that have been confirmed. Another 82 suspected overdose deaths await pending toxicology reports. And this is the most terrifying stat to me. Emergency medical services have reversed more than 7,700 overdoses countywide this year. Hundreds of people have sought treatment, and public health officials have distributed thousands of test strips and naloxone kits. So if it hadn't been for the efforts of first responders to revive people from overdoses, we could be looking at nearly 10,000 overdose deaths in King County in 2023. That is a horrifying statistic. And it is above and beyond anything we experienced from a public health death perspective during the pandemic. But what happened for more than 3 years during the pandemic in Washington state? The government took extreme measures to protect people from themselves. People who weren't engaging in illegal behavior, but people who were trying to make a living, trying to go about their lives. You don't see anything close to the same kind of extreme measures to protect people who are engaged in illegal behavior from not only killing themselves, but from running an entire city and an entire economy as a result into the ground. I'll get to more on that comparison in a moment, but I was also just blown away by Brad Finegood with Seattle King County Behavioral Health for Public Health. So this is a guy who works for King County Public Health. He says something we all know: drugs have gotten much more lethal, they've gotten to be much more available, and we know that they're much less expensive and they're also much more synthetic, he said. He also said people should test their drugs using fentanyl testing strips, refrain from using drugs alone, have naloxone on hand, and call 911 if problems arrive. Safe in the knowledge that someone who seeks medical help for a person experiencing a drug overdose is shielded from prosecutions. How about don't do drugs or we're going to put you in jail? And we're going to force you into treatment that way. No, don't do drugs alone. Have naloxone on hand so that when you do drugs and it kills you, you can bring yourself back to life. This is insane stuff, and I was really happy to see Sandeep Kaushik, who we've had on the show before. He's a Democratic political strategist. He's helped get many a Democrat elected in Washington state. He also sees the hypocrisy in all of this. When you compare from a public health emergency perspective, the response to the fentanyl crisis and the response to the pandemic. He tweeted out this graphic from the Seattle Times, which shows just the absolute skyrocketing rise in fentanyl overdoses in King County. He said, when COVID hit, we treated it like the public health emergency it was. But this public health disaster, business as usual. It's a scandal that we have no urgency, no real plan to address the fentanyl crisis ravaging Seattle's streets, one commensurate with the scale of the problem. And he is absolutely right. Thank God there are some people on the left who can be morally consistent with it on this and look at the issue with clarity. But it goes above and beyond having no urgency, no real plan, looking at comparing it to the response to the pandemic versus the response to this deadly drug epidemic that we're in. It's not just that their response isn't adequate. It's that their response is backward. It's that their response and their idea of responding to this crisis is to make it worse. In Washington State, Democrats in Olympia, they spent 2 years kowtowing to progressives who wanted to legalize hard drugs. Remember when the Blake decision came down and it nullified our state's felony drug possession statute? Lawmakers could have fixed it by adding one word to the statute to make it constitutional again. Instead, what did they do? They argued for 2 years because some progressives wanted to use that as an opportunity to de facto legalize drugs. You know who one of those progressives is? Who is on the record saying that they do not want drug use to be a crime in our state? Bob Ferguson. The guy who may very well be the next governor. We're in the middle of a crisis that is killing thousands of people. We are ground zero in the United States for the fentanyl crisis. And we have a front runner for the office of governor who says that he doesn't want hard drugs to be criminalized. And then you have this hands-off approach. You've had Seattle City Council members. Thank God we start the new year with almost an entirely brand new Seattle City Council, who look at it as a crime of poverty. You've had a city attorney prior to Ann Davison who for years was so hands-off, and they call it, this is the biggest thing for me. They call it empathy. They believe they're the ones being empathetic to these individuals who are dying on our streets and in the gutter with a needle in their arm. Yet the government took extreme measures to protect you from yourself during the pandemic. But when it comes to people who are killing themselves out in the open, plain as day, breathing meth and fentanyl smoke all over our public transportation system in the face of anyone who walks by, are they taking steps to protect those people from themselves? To protect us from them? Not a chance. And why? Why? Because if it were about saving lives, if that were truly the goal, what we're doing right now is the opposite of what needs to be done to achieve that goal. Is it about money? Is it about political ideology? Is it about not being able to admit that you were wrong? Is it you really don't care if they die? Are you in bed with the drug cartel? I mean, all that sounds extreme, but I'm just baffled. It's so hard to wrap my mind around. And again, I'm so glad there are some Democrats. Sandeep Kaushik, we should really get him on the show this week. We've had him on the show before to talk about these issues. I'm glad that he sees it as they're treating it like it's not a crisis. It's one of the worst crises we've ever been through from a public health and public safety perspective. And if they're going to keep going down the path that they're going down now in terms of the party in power in Washington state, you can expect many more people to die in 2024. That segment was brought to you in partnership with our friends over at Future 42. Turn your frustration into action at future42.org.